Hello YouTube. Today we're going to have a short video on the Taurus Security System, trademark, patent, pending, etc. A couple of different people have asked this, and I skipped over it in my other Taurus videos just because I tend to remove the lock. So what's going on here is on some Taurus pistols, actually they offer them, if I'm not mistaken, on all of their revolvers and pistols and everything. They've added this security system, and all it is a hex key with a so a normal Allen wrench kind of fitting, except it has a pin in the middle. They're called security Allen wrenches, and so the wrench itself needs to have a hole drilled out of the middle, and that's what the key is that they give you. So their keys are not unique to each gun or anything like that. They're just this security hex system. Now, I've gutted this one already, so it's actually missing a piece or two. So that will help hold things in place. But the idea is that this turns, and it has a little detent ball going on in there so that when it's out in that position, if you try to cock it, hammer can't come all the way back. You've actually blocked the path for the hammer strut. But when it's turned in the unlocked position, the hammer strut can come all the way back. So if you've lost your key, you can get them online, cheap as wood, on eBay, or even call Taurus and get them to send you one. I did do a Taurus Millennium series. They have the locking mechanism in the slide. That's slightly different. It's conceptually the same, but even harder to get to. The PT92s, though, and the other more or less full frame ones tend to have it in the back of the grip, and mechanically what it's doing is blocking the hammer strut. So that's the type we're going to look at today. Now, notably, if you have one of these and you tried to disassemble the pistol, you wouldn't have been able to get the strut cap off, and that's because this cylinder that is the lock blocks the path for it. So there is a single pin that holds it in. And so there'll be two holes on one side and one hole on the other. The one hole is where the pin goes through. The other hole is just going to be an opening. We're going to use that because it's the only way you can actually get the thing in or out. So first you want to knock out the pin there. It's the lower of the two. Once that pin is out, you can remove the whole system. But before you do, keep in mind that the parts that are involved, the cylinder itself, then there's a small spring and a tiny ball bearing. You will lose the ball bearing, so be careful. So on the inside, if we look, I'm just going to start to get this one out a little bit. Basically, you can see inside the grip the area, and wow, I just put new batteries in this and left it on again. Outstanding. So supplemental lighting, no good today. All right. The point is, what you want to do is you can see this little hole. That's important because basically you want to stick your thumb over it, essentially. And as you begin to turn the key, you'll be able to get it to start working its way out. Then you can either grab it with pliers and draw it the rest of the way out. And what I would recommend is not drawing it all the way out, or basically pushing it out from the back, and again being careful because several things are going to launch. Here's the ball bearing. So for a sense of size, that's smaller than a regular BB. And then the cylinder itself, and we'll go into all what the parts are. And what's left is a spring that you probably can't see, and this is where people make a lot of mess out of these because they got the ball bearing out, they got the piece out, and they forget about the spring. If you then tried to knock this pin out and take the bottom off, the spring is likely caught between the hammer strut cap and the frame of the gun, and you'll destroy the spring. So what we want to do is be a little more careful than that and try and actually get our spring out. Now this is actually a broken one. The real one is a few coils longer than this, but essentially it's just a spring. So now let's talk about how and why this guy actually works. And we're going to keep an eye on the damn ball bearing. So The reason the second hole is here is because we're going to use that to drop in the spring and the ball bearing and to hold the ball bearing down while we get this in place. So before we actually do all that, let's look at the bits of this piece and talk about how and why they work. So the big rectangular hole, well, if that's facing upwards, the hammer strut can actually come down and it actually dips in there. This is right at the very end of the hammer strut path. So if we look end on, can you actually see that? Hopefully, probably not without the flashlight. Anyway, if there were enough light that we could see this, if you could see that hole. Wow, that's going to be hard to see no matter what I do. The point is, with your gun, cock the hammer and you'll see the hammer strut poke its way down into the hole and become visible there. Hopefully that's coming through a little bit. Again, my apologies for messing up my camera. Let's shove something white in there and see if that helps. Maybe you can get a sense that the hammer strut is now protruding into the hole. If I fire it and release it, hammer is not there. So again, if we watch the hole while we cock the hammer, we see the hammer strut poke into the hole. Okay, so we get the idea, hopefully, that the hammer strut does reach into this cavity. And so if any part of this is facing up other than that big hole, it's going to run into it. The hammer strut's just going to bottom out on this piece. So that part, makes more or less sense. If it's in this orientation, the hammer strut can make it down. If it's turned in any other way, it's not. So if we look at what other shapes are involved here, you're going to see that there's a line, there's a cutout, and then there's a big curving cutout, and then another cutout that goes all the way to the back. And what's going on here is the spring and detent. So the spring and the ball, the ball bearing. The ball bearing is going to ride in these horizontal grooves. So the ball bearing is either going to be in this long groove, and it would be, about here, or it's going to be in the short groove around here. And the pin that we took out, the first pin, lays in this curved groove. So when you turn this, that's going to bring, so I'm going to hold, I'm holding the punch steady to represent the pin. And so this is the unlocked position. And let's see if we can't orient all of this so it's facing essentially, well, you're not going to be able to see both of those things at the same time. The point is, this hole is, yes, when it's here, this is the unlocked position. So the cylinder is all the way inside, and that's up, essentially. So the pin is actually going essentially along the bottom of this. That's why the larger hole is on top. The pin is actually going through the bottom section. And when you turn it half a turn, what you're doing, so notice how much space there is between the punch and the back of it. When I rotate this, remember the punch is the pin. The pin ain't going to move. So it's going to bring the whole cylinder forward. And that's going to make it stick out the side of the gun, and it's also going to have turned this away, so this end is now poking up. So we go from locked, it's from locked to unlocked, and locked to unlocked. And then the detent, if we think about the detent is going to be poking through from the left side. So this side is how we put it in. So the spring is actually compressed into the left side of the gun, and the detent is pushed into the left. And so the cylinder is in here like that. And if we think about that, where is that detent going to be if this is the orientation of the cylinder? Right into this long bit. And then we're going to lock it. So that means we're going to have rotated it. And now the short bit is on the left. So these two channels here are just for the detent. to snap into. So the detent is snapping from here to here, or technically from about here to here, while the pin is making the whole thing rotate, and you can see this distance on the far side of the pin is what's changing. So that's how the locking mechanism works. When it's all the way in, it's unlocked, and when you rotate it with the key, it moves to this position. The detent gives it some snappiness, and you can't turn it beyond this because this channel, this curved channel, it's a wide curve because the pin is going, partially through where the cylinder needs to be. So you can't turn it beyond this point because there wouldn't be any room. You're blocked by the pin itself. So the pin will not only retain this piece, but it will also prevent you from turning it more than the 90 degrees involved in unlocking and locking it. So that's mechanically what's going on. Now, putting the damn thing together is a little more challenging than that. So what I like to do is shove something like a punch through so you can get a sense of where this is going to bottom out, and put it in to the point where it bumps into the punch. And then we want to get it kind of level here for a bit. And we're going to take this out of the way for now. And first we're going to try and get the spring in. And the key is we want to drop it in, but make sure it goes all the way through the cavity where the cylinder is and into the far side of the frame. So if we drop it in there, maybe we get lucky and it falls straight through. Maybe it just falls into the inside of the gun. So if we're not so lucky, we take a small punch, stick the spring on the end of it, and use that to guide us all the way in. Now there's no way, because of the way the shading and the light works, that your guys are going to be able to see this, but basically I've used the punch to get the spring all the way in there, and I'm going to use the little blade of the knife just to hold it in so that as I pull out the punch, I don't pull the spring with it. So at this point, the spring is in the far side, so whatever you do, don't flip the thing over right now. Now the ball is the next tricky part. The ball is going to roll out a few times no matter what, and that's where having this piece partially in will help us get that at the right position. So again, I'm just pushing that most of the way in. I'm going to cover the inside hole with my thumb, and I'm just going to drop the ball bearing into the larger hole, and I'm going to kind of lean it back towards the side where the cylinder is. So if I got lucky, the ball bearing will now be sitting between the cylinder and sitting on top of the spring. That means it's right underneath my punch, and you should be able to look in. There's no way I can really show you this on camera, unfortunately, but the idea is you should be able to get in there and with the punch get the ball bearing lined up with the spring and the hole, and then gently push down on the ball bearing while you push in on the cylinder itself. So you'll see the ball bearing go down, and again, try and keep all these escape angles covered so if you launch the ball bearing you don't lose it. And now the punch is the only thing stopping things from going further in. So I pull the punch out and I let the cylinder guide in past the ball bearing. So now the ball bearing is free to actually do its little job and provide snappiness to the whole system. Now the trick here is, though, nothing is going to make this move in and out really. The ball bearing will tend to track in that hole, which is not what we want, which is a point that people can get confused on. So at this point we need to line it up, and the easiest way to do that is to look through the small hole as you turn the key. And what you'll see is that when the key is in the unlocked position, and it'll be one of the places the ball bearing stops it, so there's a distinct kind of thump there, you'll get a clear shot all the way through this hole of the entire cylinder. If the key is not in the right position, if the cylinder is rotated, you'll see something intruding into that hole. And you want to make sure that that hole is truly clear. And in this case, I have this nice punch which fills the hole nicely for me, that tells me I'm in the right spot. Now, with this punch acting as the pin, we can now actually take it through its paces. And now it will turn in, turn out, but not go any further than those two positions, because the punch is stopping it from going any further, and we can feel the snappiness of the ball bearing as it flips into those two channels. So I generally, once I get it to the locked position, or unlocked, excuse me, in is unlocked, and I'm sure this is lined up, then I'll pull this out and drive the pin back through. Somewhere earlier today I managed to drop my pin and I haven't found it yet, so I'm going to get a piece of spring stock eventually and make myself a new pin. I couldn't find anything lying around that was quite the right size, but the point is that's really what it takes to deal with this. So the important parts are, as you take it apart, you're going to drive the small pin out, or the pin out of the small hole. There's no pin in the large hole. You're going to push the cylinder out and hang on to the ball bearing, and then you got to get the spring out. Don't try and take the whole piece out until you have the spring and the ball bearing out, as well as the cylinder, of course. If you forget the spring and you try and get this out, chances are it's going to grab a coil of the spring and make a mess of the aluminum. So we'll go through it once more, as little as you can see it, but maybe it'll help. So again, now at this point, the pin is out. Pretend I just took it out. And then I'm going to push this out while trying to hang on to the escape path of the ball. I get that out. I tip. I get my ball. I flip it over, tap a few times, and I manage to get my spring. If I couldn't get my spring, I would go into the large hole with the punch and try and get it onto the end of the punch, at which point you could use the punch to extract it. This is just a 1/16 inch punch. It just happens to be a good size for hanging on to that spring, at least in this particular model. I suspect there's some variation from model to model as the grips are slightly larger and smaller. All right, for getting it back in, you want to put something through here so you can keep track of it and get a sense of where that all goes. We're going to take our punch and we're going to pick the flatter coiled end of this, just because it's easier to seat the ball on a coil than it is on a pokey bit of spring. I'm going to connect that in there, drop it down. Oops. Use the hobby knife to make sure that the spring doesn't come back, and the spring is all the way in place. Next, we're going to take this piece, use our thumb to cover the big hole, drop the ball bearing into the little hole. Whoops. Try not to create too much extra space there. And now we're going to come in with the punch through the big hole, and we're going to find the ball bearing, get it to seat over the spring, and then push our punch out of the way. That's why the punch is canted a bit, is because I held the ball bearing down while I pushed in the cylinder. I pull the punch out while pushing the cylinder in the rest of the way. And I take a key, put it in there, and I'm going to look through the small hole, and I'm just going to rotate it until I can see that I have a clear shot all the way through. I'm going to validate that by shoving a punch through there that fills that hole nicely. Going to test my key. And lock, unlock, snap, snap. Great. And at that point, I replace this pin, which I apologize that I can't actually demonstrate, because like I said, it's somewhere on the floor. If anyone wants to come to my house and clean it, you're welcome to. Here's a broken punch. Too small. Anyway, that's how you get around, or if you want to actually use or replace, remove, whatever, that's how you take the Taurus Security System out. And since I don't have all the parts, I'm going to take these back out so I don't forget and mangle it or lose part of them. And that's it. That's the security system at this point. If you knock this pin out, then the rest of the gun will come right apart freely. If you tried to knock it out beforehand, that's an important bit. If you were trying to do this before and you had removed this pin, get it back in first before you go monkeying with the security system. If this isn't perfectly lined up, everything with the security system becomes a giant pain in the butt to do. And in order to get this pin in, if the other ones are loose, you will have to be putting pretty significant force against the hammer strut. So let's go ahead and knock this out, and that'll pretty much be the end of the demonstration. Okay, so once that pin is out, we can see kind of a little bit more about how this was working. So the key sits in there, and when that part's at the top, and let's see, line this up right. Okay, so that punch is acting as the small pin that holds all this in place, and so that's it rotating along there. And this hole here is that big hole on the side. That's where the spring and the detent go, so that it snaps into the unlocked and locked positions. So that's the whole thing. Now these holes are slightly larger than the holes in the frame of the gun. So if in this demonstration it looks like it's a little bit floppy around there, remember that normally this cylinder would be being pushed down very hard by the hammer spring, and that provides a little more of the tension. And then of course the ball bearing detent system means it's going to snap into those two grooves. Snap, 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 snap. Unlocked, locked. So that's the mechanism in action. And to get it back in, you just got to make sure that you get the hammer spring into the little cup, and with a good deal of thumb pressure, you can get this guy started. Once it's started, use the roll pin punch to get it the rest of the way in. Went a little past center, and good as new. So the Taurus Security System. If for whatever reason you have lost all your keys, remember, just go to Home Depot, wherever, and buy yourself a set of security hex keys, and they will fit in there. It's a fairly small one, but it isn't a crazy, unimaginably hard to find thing in the universe. I have a set that I use for anything. I actually got a 64-piece set that has all kinds of crazy tipped wrenches. So that's it. The Taurus Security System consists of the key, the cylinder, the ball bearing, and the spring, and then a big old hole for it all to go into. Hope that was clear. Hope you had fun. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.